Yay! I am so excited to be back after Christmas and the holiday season to chat with Rin today. Rin, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Rin Oliver. I use they, them, and he, him pronouns, and I am a software developer here in the local Shreveport area. I'm hoping to relocate to Boston in 2025, Boston area, and I'm excited to be here today.
Ooh, Boston. That's a whole fun conversation.
Totally.
Um, I love that. I got to go to Boston for the first time last year for MIT Reality Hack. If no one has been
Amazing.
to that event, strongly recommend.
Love it. I'm originally from Massachusetts, so any chance I can get to bring people to my home state, I'm like, please go visit.
Oh, I love that. Well, I have
Yeah.
an eager agenda to try to attend that event again. So maybe you can give me all the tips before I go.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah.
Mm, I
That
love
sounds
that.
awesome.
Well, Rin, you've actually had the opportunity, and I've had the blessed opportunity to have you support some of my work with Built for Devs. And so I'm excited for multiple reasons to chat. Obviously, we've known each other for a number of years. Um, but you're just doing some really cool stuff, both in some of the efforts you're working on with me, but also with some of the other things that you work on and some of the things that you've done in the past. So I would love to hear sort of like, what do you do? I traditionally ask kind of job title, company, and industry, but I think you have your hands in a lot of really cool stuff. So more generally, what is it that Rin does?
Yeah, well, right now I'm getting to work with you, doing
Yay.
some technical community architecture work. I'm also doing some documentation work for the Niven Lee Foundation. And the Niven Lee Foundation is a member controlled and democratically governed technical organization supporting open source services and projects around the world. So it's very cool. They're really about balancing power between contributors and maintainers and sustaining projects within the corporations that use them. They use Ore, which is a free and open source Rust project. They also run Hachyderm, which is a social media site built on Mastodon. It's one of the larger Mastodon instances. And they
Hmm.
also are working on Patchly, which is an application and then eventually will hopefully be an association, which is an Android client for Mastodon and Mastodon servers. So they're doing some really cool stuff.
That is like super cool. So like the
Yeah.
documentation for something that is like a beautiful governance or root for our open
Mm-hmm.
source work, like that's amazing.
Yeah, so yeah, it's an exciting little project I'm working on there. Some of their docs, and I'm going to be doing that for the next couple of days. And right now, I'm actively interviewing currently on the job market. Before I was working with you, I was working for a large national bank as a software engineer and agile coach. So that was a good time. And then prior to that, I was over at Camunda doing technical community building over there as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, you've got like a little bit of DevRel in there. You've got a lot of like actual just traditional software engineering in
Yeah.
there. Like I love that. Obviously like developer experience and sort of productivity vibes into that as well. That's really cool.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, at US Bank, I was supporting platform engineering and platform support services. So that was a really good time along with my agile coaching over there. I had fun.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Well, I absolutely enjoy the work that we get to do together. Um,
Same.
You've been really monumental with a lot of my clients, but specifically sort of in the ML ops space. You really helped with a lot of like really great research and diving in there. So
Thank
your
you.
background is just like very diverse, really, in the skill set that you have. So I know that you will not be on the job market for very long.
Keeping my fingers crossed. That's the dream.
Yep, that is the dream. Okay, so let's dive into what's your developer education?
I'm actually self-taught. Everything that I know about developer engineering and software engineering, I taught myself. I actually got involved in software engineering through contributing to the Kubernetes ecosystem. I was introduced to Kubernetes through my work at the Newsjack. Shout out to my fellow TNS peeps. So through TNS, I got introduced to the folks at the CNCF and Linux Foundation, and really that were working on Kubernetes. And I got brought into the contributor experience SIG. They now call them tags, I think, tactical advisory groups. But I got involved with that through my friend Paris Pittman, and Paris got me to start contributing to some of the Kubernetes contributor docs, and from there it all spiraled. And from there, I got into platform evangelism, developer relations, and now to software engineering. So that was how I've learned everything that I know today.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Okay, so I have to say, like, that's actually a really complex technical space to enter into and sort of like learn in that way. Obviously, you don't necessarily have the experience, learning through a different channel. That's your experience, but sort of what lessons or maybe things did you I don't know what lessons or maybe tales do you have from sharing that, because that's like Kubernetes is not just this little thing that you dive
No,
into. It is like this complex, massive concept
yeah,
for infrastructure. Like,
it
yeah,
is.
tell me a bit about that.
I was involved in the contributor experience side. So what we were about is really just making that the experience of contributing to Kubernetes easier for folks. Really going out and auditing old issues, going out and updating documentation, fixing up the contributor guide to be clearer and
Mm,
more cohesive, so that people that were coming in and trying to contribute to the project knew where to go. They weren't picking up stale issues that were out of date. The
yep.
docs were clear and easy to understand, fixing formatting for the docs, etc. So that was where I was coming in, was improving that developer experience for new contributors.
Oh my gosh, that's really cool. Which you can very much do without understanding the technology, but then there are
Absolutely.
certain hurdles you get to where it's like, okay, wait, to understand how to help you, let me understand a bit more. So it sort of
Hmm.
eases you into the knowledge. Wow, that's really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, it was fun.
Well, to summarize, only because you're currently on the market, to me, it sounds like you would be an amazing candidate for a role that obviously wants to focus on developer experience, that needs that just absolute beautiful presence and documentation presentation for them, which is pretty much everybody. But I think there are certain platforms that really do need a stronger documentation presence than others, right? We can look at some tools and it's like, great, easy to do, right? And there's more complicated or more complex technological tools and things that we can build out there, which require more of those vast understanding. I also think it sounds like you have a lot with the open source contribution space. And so I've actually spoken to many clients and many people who are just looking to sort of carve into that space, right? How do we start to have an open source product? How do we grow that, right? And as you know, there's so much that goes into that when building that presentation and enabling those developers to feel empowered to get involved in your project. And it sounds like you'd be a great candidate for those people to consider.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I agree completely that there's a lot of ways to start an open source product, and you have to really consider, what does your product have? How are you going to govern it? How are you going to accept contributions? What is that
Yes.
experience like? Is your contribution process tiered? Is it however many rounds of review do things go to, etc.? There's a lot of things you have to consider. You can't just go, we're opening PRs now.
Exactly. There's a lot that just goes into like, just the empowerment of the developers, right? Because it takes, yes, we can be eager about getting involved and contributing back to open source, but it has to sort of fill into like our own pain points and problems, right? Like, do I use this project? Do I need this project? And that's when we sort of get that energy. And for something that's new, it takes a bit to get that energy. So it really truly, in my opinion, requires someone who can go in there and actually build create those strong relationships and bonds that enable developers to do that.
Absolutely, I agree completely. I think that's really important. Relationship building is huge. If you're not like really understanding your users and really trying to build a genuine relationship, then you're not going to really meet a need. You're just trying to sell a product. They're two different things.
Yes, exactly. I agree. All right, awesome. Okay, so we got to talk a little bit about what you're doing and what you're building. One of my traditional questions is like, what do you build, and what is your stack and sort of use case for what you're building? But you kind of have your hands in everything. So maybe there's a specific project you want to speak to. You've already alluded to some projects, but if you want to dive into, something that you might be building or working on, and sort of what that stack looks like. What I like to do with this question is really give listeners an idea of sort of like, what you get your hands in, and maybe what tools might be leveraged with some other tools. And you had shared some early on, but curious if you want to expand on any of that.
Yeah, right now, like I said, I'm working on some docs for the Nivenly Foundation. So it's about sustainability, autonomy, control to open source projects and communities. So they're working on, like I said, Ore, which is a free and open source Rust project. They're working on Hachyderm and Patchly. So I'm going to be working on their just clearing up their docs and really just helping update like their who we are page, the about us page, just cleaning up a few things like just really just kind of trying to improve their docs experience and bolster that. And I'm excited to get that started. So it's going to be really interesting to work with them. And I'm familiar with their team in a few ways. I've worked with them in my work on the board of the Diana Initiative, which is a nonprofit for women and non-binary people getting into cybersecurity. So I know them through that space. So it's really nice to be getting to work with them on this project as well.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
Honestly, it's really great to hear about, that community offering as well too. I think it's really important, like as developers and as humans generally, right? Like we like to gravitate and spend time with the people that we spend time with. I say this on multiple episodes. I'm going to say it again. Developers are not like antisocial people. We are people who want to hang out with people who are like us. And I think the more
totally.
that yeah, and the more we can make those channels feel like us, right, where we can get into difficult technological things like cybersecurity and do that with people that we feel comfortable with. I think that's such a beautiful thing. So that's really cool to hear about.
Yeah, I love Day Initiative. They're pretty great. If you haven't checked them out, the Day Initiative is on the internet. Just give it a Google, and they are all over the place. And they would be grateful for help. I know they always are looking for volunteers, and they're always looking for CFP submissions as well. If you're looking to submit a CFP, their call for papers will go up um, probably pretty soon, actually. So they're looking for sponsors, they're looking for proposals, they're looking for volunteers. They need a little bit of everything. So they're dedicated to helping everyone who's underrepresented in information security. And their new conference they just got announced is going to be Monday, August 4th, 2025, at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So that's pretty cool.
Hmm, that
Yeah,
is really cool. Thank you for that shout out. I think that's
you're
great. That
welcome.
community can benefit from that.
Yeah, definitely.
One follow-up question I have for you, and
Sure.
I think this is a good question that I think a lot of folks think about, and honestly, a lot of developers think about too, because they are usually building the products or building the stuff, right? And so they're not necessarily the ones who are traditionally creating docs, but in most of the sort of environments, right? Oftentimes, and you can correct me on how what you've seen, oftentimes engineering creates sort of this like MVP V0 version of the docs, and then that hits the hands of the technical writer, the developer relations team, the developer experience engineer, whoever's sort of in that place. They freshen that up, they button that up, they make it really beautiful, they expand likely because it's directly from engineering, so it maybe doesn't consider other audiences and things. And they bring those docs together. A lot of times there are engineers that I speak to and they're like, I don't write docs, I don't have to write docs, I shouldn't write docs. And it's interesting, exactly. It's interesting in regards to obviously we write docs as engineers to write our own kind of documentation. But I've heard a number of different opinions on them writing the actual documentation for a product. What have you experienced in the past and what do you think about when you go into documentation, especially as you receive it from engineering and want to make that really powerful documentation for that end user?
I think it's absolutely critical to write documentation as an engineer. I think that especially if you're in a platform engineering space and a DevOps space, that you're going to be wanting to write your documentation yourself and working with your team so that you're really seeing everything end to end, and so that you're able to document that user journey and really see, what does that use case look like? What problems could people run into while they're working, while they're trying to build with this? How can we anticipate for those edge cases, etc., and making sure that your docs are up to date and writing concise release notes to say, here's what we changed, and really communicating out if you have any breaking changes is really important as well. You don't want to be the person that's introducing a breaking change and not telling somebody. So I've had that happen more than once where there was a breaking change and you're having to message hundreds of people like, by the way, this broke, and so then they have to go back and update their CI/CD pipeline. They lose time, they lose productivity, and then so just communicating your breaking changes, updating your release notes, making sure that you're practicing docs as code and writing your docs at the same time that you're writing your code is pretty critical.
I love what you just said, docs as code. I think that's really, really important. And honestly, like the developers I was referencing, right, are in this case tend to be sort of the newer developers, or maybe they are working in a different type of a landscape where that type of user documentation is less necessary. Maybe they're, working internally at a bank and the documentation, they're not creating APIs for developers, right? They're leveraging APIs and they're integrating it.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, but what you said is so incredibly important, right? Docs as code, like it's something that should just be considered along what you're building, whether you're writing that for an end user, whether you're writing that for the next team member that's going to come in. Um,
Absolutely. Because
what
you
kind of
do. Mhm.
yeah? You go. I was actually going to ask you what kind of tips you would provide to the engineers who question the necessity to write docs.
Because it's if it, even if it's not an end user, it's still your coworkers, it's still your team, it's
Uh-huh.
still somebody's gonna have to read that. So you're gonna want to really update that and make sure that everything's accurate and to the best of its ability at least.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Fully agree. I love that. I think it's just something, as you're coming into being a software engineer, if someone is sort of newer or whatever that situation might be, it's just a really good skill to flex and to start practicing and to actually begin to leverage. Um, no different than commenting your code, but we
Basic.
will. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, comment your code. Yeah, just basically keeping that information up to date and making sure that everything's as accurate as it can be for whoever your end user is, whether it's internal or external, is really important.
Yep. I love that. All right. What does an average day look like for you? I know to these days it's a little bit different, but like I feel like you've got your hands more in things, but what does that sort of average day look like in what you're diving into and sort of, context switching?
Yeah, usually I'm either diving into docs or diving into CI/CD pipelines. It's either or content. It's either one of those three things. It's either just writing YAML and improving some CI/CD pipelines, working with things like GitHub Actions, or just GitLab runners or whatever your CI/CD flavor, Terraform modules, etc. Working on something like that, or I'm working on updating docs, updating pieces of documentation, whether that be READMEs, contributor guides, or just actually updating API docs, platform docs, etc. Writing how tos, onboarding guides, etc. Um, that sort of thing. And then other than that, just working on just generate content, blog posts, social media posts, that sort of thing. So it's really just a blend of things. It really depends on the day.
Yeah, I love that so much. Okay, so I have a question as it relates to what you shared with your day to day. When you're going in to start to create content or to create or improve documentation, we talked about how you got into tech and how Kubernetes is obviously this very complicated technological solution, and how it's not easy to necessarily just dive into something like that and be like, I'm going to write the docs about how to do Kubernetes and everything that comes into that. But you do have to approach really technological products and technological documentation. So, what is sort of some of your tricks or trade secrets, or just some of the ways that you go about approaching understanding a new product or a new dev tool or a new whatever it might be, so that you can actually start to contribute and to create those docs?
I do a lot of research. I dive into everything I can. I look for blog posts. I look for podcasts. I look at their docs. I check out their docs. I check out their products and see what's what. I really try to get a scope of things before I dive in and start writing, so I know what I'm writing about, who I'm writing for.
Yep, I love that. All right. So you try to put yourself in the seat of that developer essentially and really understand what it is that they're going through in
Yeah,
order to actually create that. Okay. Very cool. I like that. What tools do you personally use like in your
gosh.
day to day?
My day to day, I'm using usually Visual Studio Code, GitHub or GitLab, whichever. Usually GitHub these days, but I've also used GitLab. I've also worked at GitLab. Um,
Great company.
Both, yeah, I love them. I'm usually just rocking out with my VS Code. I've got Copilot. I use it a little bit here there, not so much. I don't lean on it a lot, but I use it if I'm really like stuck with something. Um, I enjoy Gen AI to that extent, but I don't usually trust it so much with code right now. It depends on the code. Depends on the code. Um, but I think it's a valuable tool for like trying to hammer out like ideas sometimes. So I enjoy it for that.
Yeah.
It's interesting to lean on at some points. I also just am working a lot with Terraform and GitHub Actions and those sort of things. So basically, just you'll see me rocking with some VS Code and a little bit of Markdown.
I love that. Love that. Do you write your markdown in VS Code or do you have
I
any?
do. I do my
Okay,
Markdown in VS
cool.
Code. Yeah, it's all in VS Code usually, unless it's in. Sometimes it's in Google Docs, but that depends on the person. Depends on the project. I'm going to be working in straight up Google Docs later today. So yeah, and then I might do a PR, but I don't know. I might just leave it. I might just leave it in the Google Doc. It depends. Depends on the
Yeah.
client. Depends on what they want. Some places say do a pull request. Some places say just send us the Google Doc.
Yeah. It's really hard to write markdown in Google Docs. I'll tell you
It's
that
very
much.
hard. They don't make it easy. I wish that Google would actually be like, oh, this is Markdown and figure that out, but they haven't gotten there yet.
Well, it's interesting to me because it's like at the end of the day, it's like it's so easy to do, right? It's just like
Exactly.
remembering all the different sort of symbols that you put in front of the text, and
Yep.
it's a translation and it's like a third party extension. To me, I'm like, okay,
Um,
Google, just like put it in there that you
yeah,
convert to
just
Markdown or
put it
something.
in exactly. Like it shouldn't need to be a third party extension. They need to just like get on that really bad.
Yep. I use Notion for that reason though, because Notion
Right?
automatically copy pastes into Markdown, and then when you copy it out,
Amazing.
it'll output it as Markdown. So that's
That's
my.
delightful.
It is. It's super delightful. Okay, cool. Well, there's some tools for writing Markdown if anyone needs any in that regard. So as you're diving into the work that you're doing, obviously you face a variety of different kinds of challenges, and maybe they're not some of the traditional challenges that we see someone who is in a traditional software engineering role, maybe hit or run into, which I think is really interesting, right? So maybe what are some of the challenges that you faced as you're diving into your work through either documentation or, improving developer experience or whatever that might look like? Because I know for a fact myself that those challenges are different. So maybe what are some of those challenges that you might dive into, or one specifically, if you want to speak to something?
Not necessarily. I feel like a challenge that I have is not having the whole picture and having to get it
Mm.
from other sources. So that's a challenge that I've had is just having to distill third party information and really having to context switch and really make sure that everything aligns because making sure that you're talking to the right people to get the information you need to get your job done.
I agree. And on that note, honestly, like if you are coming in, and of course you're coming in to drive improvements, right? And so you don't expect that their docs and their presence is going to be perfect when you come in.
Absolutely.
That's the whole intent.
Yeah.
But ideally, they're probably a V0 or a V1, or they're an early version, and you're coming in to drive those improvements. Or maybe they're bringing you in to start from the beginning, but it sounds like you're doing a lot of improvement driving in that work. To me, if you're doing the documentation and your developer presence well, you shouldn't have to chase those things down, right? And so then that almost creates sort of this beautiful like dichotomy or sort of like culmination of where you're able to say, hey, I had to go find these things. They're not in the docs and they really should be.
Exactly. Exactly. It's saying, this is missing from your docs. Can we put it on this page?
Right, right. And I think on top of, what you're doing, right? If you come into a platform or a tool or a product or whatever it might be, and you're not able to get that information, that means that all the rest of their developer users are doing the same exact type of research. And so they're going out and having to do the same thing. And so obviously that's why you're there, but it's one of those things of putting yourself in that shoe and like really realizing that those developer documentation, there's everything that goes into that. You have to bring someone new in and they have to be able to go through all of that without having to research externally to understand what your product can do.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where you're really just going to be working on your use case, seeing where are the challenges, where are the pain points, where are people falling off, what's that heat map telling us, where do people get lost in this journey, where are they getting stuck, and how can we fix it?
Right, right, right. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. I love that. Um, all right. I'm trying to think of a good follow-up question because there's so much in there, but I think I posted the other day on LinkedIn that developers go to your documentation like nearly first. And you've been a part of some of the developer experience audits that we've had the great pleasure of bringing into the Built for Dev Hub, which if anyone wants to find them, you can visit hub.builtfor.dev. If you go under events, there's lots of events that are both upcoming and events that have been in the past. And there are some live DX audits that you can find in there. Um, when we do those, it's so interesting because most of the time we're going through the homepage and they're like, I'm trying to get devs to read through the homepage with me. And they're like, but let's go to the docs. Let's go to the docs. And so I think there's this really beautiful thing there. Like, what do you think about documentation as it relates to being sort of where I'm alluding to is someone the other day said that the documentation should look beautiful just like your homepage does. And I personally am like, I agree, but I also disagree, and that I could care less if docs are beautiful. I just want them to be functional. Like if they can get me from A to Z through a getting started guide quickly and I can see the value, that's what matters to me. So I'm curious what you think as it relates to that sentiment of devs go straight to the docs, then the integration page, then maybe they care a little bit about your homepage. And as it relates to sort of design and sort of that presence, like what do you feel matters as you dive into the docs and the integrations?
That's absolutely what I do in my journey is I'll go straight to the docs and I'm trying to figure out, what's missing, where are the pieces that need to be updated, etc. So I really feel like that's majorly important, is to check out the docs first, and then you just move around the page and see what's what. So I think that's super important, and the docs themselves tell you the first step in the journey, and then it's just seeing from there. I think documentation is, the first place any developer is going to go, is to see, how does this work? How do I get started? And they want to get started fast. They don't want to just sit there and go through 17 pages of docs just to get a hello world going. So I think that having your docs and your getting started be quick and succinct is important. And making sure that you've got your calls to action, that everything works. You have no broken links, etc.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Fully agree. What about branding and sort of the design of it? Do you feel that design of your documentation, by the way, my daughter popped her cute little head in here for a hot minute. Do you feel that like the design and sort of the branding of the docs is important, or do you feel I love that face. I'm just going to stop. Speak to that face.
Kind of. I feel like that's not necessarily something I wouldn't be like, these docs are pretty. That's
Yep.
not. No, I want to know what's in them. I want to make sure the links work. I want to make sure that the writing is actually like good, and it tells the story it needs to tell, and it gets me what I need. I never. The formatting, I feel like, is the imagery, like the graphic design pieces. I care about them to an extent. I want them to look nice, but also if it's just like a text based, like Hugo or whatever type site, like that's a wiki type thing, that's fine too. Like
Yep.
if it's just text and it's formatted well, that's fine. Have clear navigation, have a clear breakdown of your information, and make sure that that's okay, so you're not having to click here, there, and everywhere for your docs. But I don't necessarily care if they're. I think that they have to be functional and like they make sense cohesively, but I also like, I don't care if they have like a nice logo or something. Like that's nice, but it's not helping anybody.
Yep. Yep. I fully agree. I do think that there can be sort of a, if the docs can at least make it clear that you're in the same platform, right? It's like there's a
Exactly.
color scheme carried
Yeah,
over,
make sure the color matches.
yeah, clean logo, right? And you can very easily go back to a homepage, go back to a
Yeah,
community, go back
exactly.
to share
Have that
feedback.
back to top button works, etc. Jump to next section, whatever. Make sure all those work.
Yes, yes, I agree. Because to me, I've never been into a documentation and I'm like, well, this is ugly. Because I don't care if it's ugly. I'm like,
Nope.
what I will say is, well, this is worthless. That's the
Exactly.
feedback that I might
Yeah,
share, but not that it's
that
ugly.
doesn't help me. Yeah, it's like I couldn't find what I needed here.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I think getting started guides too, to really kind of dive into it. I think that that's almost like it feels so common sense to me, but there's also been a number of folks who are in an earlier stage with documentation who don't have a getting started guide. I personally feel that they're like, I don't know, the bird's eye view of like everything that you could be potentially doing with that tool. How do you feel about getting started guides, and maybe sort of like, as you think about a getting started guide, what do you try to include, or what do they sort of mean for you as you think about them?
I feel like getting started guides are really great. It just depends on, what you're trying. You have to really figure out what the getting started guide is for. At
Sure.
which piece of getting started with your particular product are you solving for? Do you want it to be an end-to-end journey where they've got the whole thing? Do you want to break it up into sections where get started doing this, then you do this, and that's a different guide, then you do that, and it's a different guide? Or is it you want the whole journey? So you have to figure out how you're breaking up that content. Is it chapters? Is it just one huge doc that's a massive getting started guide? Or would you have to figure, are you going to break it up or not? That's your biggest question first, is it going to be a huge getting started guide, or is it going to be broken up into pieces? How are you going to
Mhm.
organize that navigation, etc.? What are you trying to solve? What do you want people to do? Do you want them to build an
Yes.
app? Do you want them to call an API? Do you want them to install a plugin? What do you want them to actually do? What is your method? What do you consider success when you're
Yes.
writing a getting started guide? What is your success method, and what do you want people to actually have accomplished at the end of it? So that's the key when you're writing a getting started guide, is go, what do I want people to have achieved at the end of this?
I fully agree with that, and I think oftentimes that is likely a misconception going into a getting started guide, is sometimes it's not verbose enough, or sometimes it's too verbose about trying to include everything. When I think about getting started guides, I like to direct clients towards what's the value prop. Like, when will a developer be like, oh baby, this is it. This is what I need, right? What is that? Is that first API call? Is that deploying to production? Is that full integration? Like, when do they reach that sort of value point? And how do you build a getting started guide around reaching that value point?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You're totally right there. I think that's getting to that key moment where they're like, this is what I need. This solved my problem. I'm good
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Well, this has been absolutely lovely. Where can folks find you?
Usually LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't use a whole lot of other social media. I have a Blue Sky, but I never check it. So
Same.
I would say linkedin.com/C as in cat, K as in kangaroo, CK Oliver. So that's me. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn. Just search my name, Rin Oliver. I should pop up. And happy to accept new connections.
I love that. Okay, well, I will make sure that I share the link in the show notes as well as with the podcast. Just to summarize and reiterate for anyone who is still listening or for anyone who listens in the future, Rin is on the job market, and I have personal experience working with them and would just vastly, vastly recommend their skills to anyone who is looking to improve their developer experience, developer approach, their DevRel program, essentially anything in regards to all the beautiful stuff that we talked about. Very skilled human being that you would be very, very lucky to work with. So, on that note, I hope that you have a fabulous rest of your day and week diving into the cool challenges that you get to dive into. And it's been so lovely having you on the show, Rin.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it and looking forward to all the great stuff we get to do together as well.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Goodbye,